island should you visit, Lombok or Bali? They are very similar in a lot of ways, but they're also super different in a lot of ways. And if you've got limited time in Indonesia and you're trying to figure out which island is right for you, I'm here to help you. I've spent time on both of the islands, and while they have some similarities, they're right next to each other, they're a similar size, they are very different in terms of crowds, culture, and what you can expect when you visit each one. So let's dive in and see which one is the better fit for you. I think the first thing that we have to address, obviously, is that there's going to be a big difference in the crowds in each of the islands. Bali, depending on the source that you believe, gets either between 6 or 2 million visitors a year, and that is just so many more people than Lombok, which is closer to 1 million. Now, 1 million might still seem like a lot, and it can be, but if you happen to visit during the rainy season, which is the low season, you might not even encounter that many people. I went to Lombok a few years ago during rainy season, and I actually got their most famous waterfalls almost entirely to myself. I also didn't have to share the beaches with very many people. I had stayed in Kuta, that's where I was basing myself, and I was exploring during the day, and some of the beaches were a little bit crowded, yes, the famous ones, but other ones, like literally nobody was there.
I can definitely dig that.
It was pretty incredible. The thing about Bali is that there are some beaches like that, of course. It's a big island, there's lots of options, but if you happen to base yourself in the more popular areas like Canggu, Kuta, Seminyak, Sanur, Ubud, you're going to be sharing this experience with a lot of people. You really only need to consider the traffic on each island to get a sense of what I'm talking about. On Bali, the traffic is legendary. It can take hours to get through the gridlock, even just to exit the airport. That is not going to generally be the experience on Lombok, where I don't think I've ever been in a traffic jam. Here on Bali, traffic jams are just part of your daily life, and that is something to seriously consider if you want to deal with during your vacation. When it comes to the flora, fauna, and the things to do on each of the islands, I have to say they are both so absolutely dreamy and beautiful. There are just so many beautiful things to do there. Each island has volcanoes, each island has waterfalls, each island has absolutely stunning beaches. Each island has a set of smaller islands off of them that are also very much worth exploring. I have to say, as a content creator, it is kind of the dream to come visit this area, not only because it's just so stunningly beautiful no matter what time of year you're here, no matter what time of day you're photographing, no matter what part of the island you're on, there is something absolutely stunningly beautiful to see and do.
Are my eyes playing a trick on me? This is like baby blue.
It just makes my life and my job really easy. Speaking of traveling, I have spent a few months between all of the islands in Indonesia, and I have to say that the culture between Bali and Lombok is something that you definitely want to consider because it is wildly different. Look, I have to tell you that there is nowhere on earth that has the culture like Bali does. There's something so beautiful about the way that things are carved here, the beautiful temples, the devotion, the friendliness of the people is legendary, and it is ever present.
Pretty good place to travel with a baby. Everyone wants to hold him.
Just the beauty of all of the decorations that you get to see during the cultural celebrations, which we happen to be here for. You will not find architecture, you will not find this exact type of culture and religion anywhere else, and I think that is what has made Bali so enchanting to people for so long. If you are female, it is easier to travel here and wear a bikini and not get unwanted attention. If you're queer, this island is going to be much friendlier to your lifestyle. However, the thing about being here in Bali is that you're going to share it with a lot of people. Just keep in mind that the popular areas here might just feel like you are basically only hanging out with other foreigners, especially if you're going to go to Kuta or Seminyak, which I actually don't recommend. Canggu is also going to have that vibe. However, once you start to head to the north part of the island, there are far fewer tourists. So if you're willing to head off the beaten path a little bit, you don't have to share it with quite as many people. Instead of Canggu, consider going to Karamas. That's an area of the island that I visited in the past, and no one was actually on that part of the beach. So just coming to Bali doesn't mean that you have to spend time around tons of people, but there are some benefits to coming to Bali that aren't really present on Lombok. If you want to have access to beautiful villas like this one that have their own swimming pools, that have all of the amenities, like we basically have a 24/7 butler essentially here. If I need anything, I can message her and she makes it happen. It's really easy to get a taxi here, to get a motorbike here. You can just do it all through the Grab app. And while of course that exists on Lombok, there are just way more things here to kind of make tourists' life easier. There are more high-end resorts here. Lombok is definitely starting to catch up a little bit in that regard, but there are so many absolutely beautiful resorts here, especially like the one we stayed at recently in Ubud, that you just can't find really anywhere else. And that is really just an homage to Bali's beautiful culture and style. So if you want to have that experience, there's really only one place in the world that you can do that. If you want to go to the beach clubs, if you want to eat Instagram food, honestly, Bali is the place to do that. So you have to just kind of ask yourself what kind of vacation you want. The thing about Lombok is once you head there, it's going to be a lot more local, I would say. There are definitely parts of the island that are suited to tourism. The Gili Islands just off of Lombok, definitely. You are going to find tons of tourist infrastructure there. But then once you start to head towards the middle of Lombok, once you start to head to the other parts of the island, you're not going to find nearly as many other tourists or tourist infrastructure. Once you get down to Kuta Lombok, you're going to find it again, but on a much smaller scale than you would find here in Bali. For some people, especially me in my 20s, that suited me perfectly.
It's beautiful in every direction.
That was the experience that I wanted. I wanted nothing to do with Bali and its gridlock. I wanted to find beaches where nobody was. I wanted to still find that wildness that is so present in parts of Southeast Asia, but that you have to go off the beaten path a little bit more for. Let's be honest, neither Lombok or Bali is super off the beaten path in the way that maybe Sumatra or East Java would be, but there's still so much beauty to be found here. But if you're trying to decide between these two islands, I think you need to ask yourself one ultimate question. Do you want to have the experience of really going off the beaten path, even if it means that things are going to be a little bit more difficult, even if it means that as a female you need to cover up a little bit more and be a little bit more aware of that, and saying goodbye to experiencing the really interesting culture and beauty and architecture here in Bali in favor of having maybe that waterfall all to yourself, in favor of maybe having that beach all to yourself. Another thing that I would absolutely advocate you really think about is time of year. Bali and Lombok, yes, they're right next to each other, but they experience a much different weather pattern. Lombok is overall a lot drier, and Bali, if you visit during the rainy season, which is during like December and January, it can be the heaviest. You might get rain every single day, honestly. That's just not going to be as much of the case on Lombok. Having traveled in both during the rainy season, I can definitely tell you that you will not get nearly as much on Lombok, although of course it's still going to happen because the rainy season is the rainy season. Another thing to consider is what you want to do. Both islands have a lot to offer in terms of things to do. Both have beautiful waterfalls to explore. Both have beautiful beaches to explore. Both have really interesting towns and cultures to explore. Rice paddies that you can see. Both have volcano treks that are really cool. I think that Rinjani is one of the coolest experiences to have in Indonesia, so that's definitely one that if you're here during the dry season, I recommend doing. There's also so much to do on the Gilis that are off of Lombok, especially if you want to have the experience of learning how to scuba dive in currents that aren't as strong as Bali. And also you can learn how to free dive there. That's something that I did when I visited. And if you do want to party, you can do so on Gili T, whereas the rest of Lombok, you're not going to find nearly as much of a party scene as you will find on Bali. However, Bali has its own set of islands off of the southern tip that are really, really beautiful, rugged, and interesting, called the Nusa Islands. And I visited those in the past as well. And I have to say, if you want to visit Nusa Penida independently and not on a tour, you better be good on a motorbike because those roads are bad. The nice thing about the Gilis is all of that is experienced on foot. That brings me to transportation. If you plan on driving your own motorbike, it is just going to be a lot less intimidating on Lombok, where there's just way less traffic than here on Bali, where there are so many people, so much traffic. And even as someone who has some experience driving motorbikes, I won't do it here, but I will do it on Lombok. So what it comes down to for me when choosing between which island I want to visit is what kind of experience do I want to have? Do I want to have the experience of staying in a beautiful villa, or maybe having the experience of going to a yoga retreat or some kind of other spiritual retreat? Do I want to eat Instagram food? There's nothing wrong with that if that's what you want. Then maybe I would come to Bali, where it can have a little bit more of a high-end experience. Or do I want something that feels a little bit more authentic, raw, and rugged, but leaves behind all of the things like villas and yoga retreats and the cool Balinese culture? Do I just want to experience nature and not have to share it with very many people? And also, Lombok can be a cheaper experience. As a backpacker who just wanted some authenticity, Lombok made a lot of sense for me at that point in my life, and I would still love to go back and visit. But now wanting a little bit more of the comforts and the luxury parts of traveling, Bali has suited me perfectly for this vacation, traveling with my family, traveling with a young child, and just kind of wanting things to be a little bit easier. So ask yourself, what kind of vacation do you want? One that you share with a lot of people, but it's beautiful and interesting and has a lot of comforts, or one that is a little bit more like traveling rather than touristing? And that can be the deciding factor for you between Lombok and Bali.